The Great Hall of the Galactic Assembly stretched for miles in every direction. Floating platforms held representatives from 847 different species, each one watching the central stage where the fate of an entire civilization was about to be decided. Commander Nathan Cole stood aboard the diplomatic vessel Horizon's Edge, watching the live transmission with his hands clasped behind his back. His second in command, Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos, stood beside him with her jaw clenched tight. The vote had taken 6 hours. 6 hours of watching numbers tick upward on a holographic display, each number representing another species that wanted humanity gone from galactic society. Nathan had stopped counting after 500. High Chancellor Vortek, a massive creature with 6 arms and skin like polished stone, rose from his throne to deliver the final verdict. His voice echoed through translation devices across 1,000 worlds. The motion passes with 712 votes in favor, 135 opposed. Earth and all human colonies are hereby exiled from galactic space. You will be confined to the quarantine zone at the galaxy's edge. All trade agreements are terminated. All communication links will be severed. You have 18 months to remove your entire population from civilized space. Maria made a small sound beside Nathan. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on the screen where Ambassador Eliza Grant stood alone on the central platform. Surrounded by species that had just condemned her people to die in the darkness between galaxies, Elisa was 63 years old. She had spent 30 of those years building bridges between humanity and the galactic community. She had negotiated peace treaties, trade agreements, and cultural exchanges. She had believed, truly believed, that humanity could find its place among the stars. Now, she stood perfectly still. Her gray hair pulled back in a simple knot, her diplomatic robes hanging loose on her thin frame. When she spoke, her voice carried no trace of emotion. The human delegation acknowledges this decision. We will begin our withdrawal immediately. That was all. No arguments, no pleas for reconsideration, no angry accusations, just quiet acceptance. The transmission ended. Nathan finally turned to look at Maria. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady when she spoke. Sir, we cannot just accept this. After everything we have done for them, we cured the Valorian plague. We saved 3 dying sons. We ended the HFY War when no one else could. Nathan allowed himself a small smile. Ambassador Grant said we accept the decision. She did not say we would lie down and die. He walked to the communication console and activated the ship-wide channel. All hands, this is Commander Cole. Set course for Earth. Maximum speed. We have work to do. Across human space, similar orders were being given. On colony worlds and space stations, in military bases and research facilities, the same message spread through secure channels that the Assembly had never managed to crack. The verdict had been expected. Humanity had been preparing for this moment for almost a decade. On Earth, President Katherine Dawson stood before the United Earth Council in an underground bunker that officially did not exist. The room was filled with military commanders, scientists, and colonial governors. Holographic displays showed the faces of leaders from every human settlement in the galaxy, all connected through quantum links that the Assembly could not intercept. Catherine was 58 years old. With short brown hair and eyes that had seen too much, she had been elected on a platform of peaceful coexistence with the galactic community. Now she would lead her people into exile. They have made their choice, she said, her voice filling the room. Now we make ours. Project Exodus is now active. We have 18 months before the quarantine barriers go up. In that time, we will do what humanity has always done when pushed into a corner. She paused, looking at the faces around her. Some were afraid. Some were angry. But all of them were listening. We will adapt. We will survive. And we will prove every single one of them wrong. Chief Science Officer Daniel Porter stood up from his seat. He was a thin man with glasses and nervous hands, but when he spoke about his work, his entire demeanor changed. He became confident, almost excited. For the past 10 years, we have been sending unmanned probes beyond the galactic rim, he said, activating a holographic display that showed star charts the Assembly had never seen. The outer reach, No species in recorded history has ever explored this region. They believe it is empty, hostile, impossible to survive. He zoomed in on a cluster of faint signals at the very edge of the map. They are wrong.
Ow.
The images that appeared made several people in the room gasp. Planets with breathable atmospheres. Asteroid fields rich with rare minerals. And something else? Something that made Daniel's voice drop to almost a whisper. Energy signatures. Artificial energy signatures? Something is out there. Something old. Something powerful. Something that has been waiting for a very long time. The room erupted in questions, but Catherine raised her hand for silence. We will have time for discussion later. Right now, we need to focus on the task at hand. Every human being, every piece of technology, every scrap of knowledge we possess must be moved to the outer reach within 18 months. It is the largest undertaking in human history. She looked around the room one final time. The assembly thinks they are sending us to our deaths. They have no idea that they are setting us free. In the weeks that followed, the true scale of humanity's preparations became clear. Secret shipyards that had been building vessels for years suddenly revealed their existence. Colony ships larger than anything the assembly had ever constructed began taking shape in orbit around Earth. Military vessels were fitted with weapons, systems that human engineers had developed. In hidden research facilities, technologies that the assembly had never seen, Ambassador Eliza Grant returned to Earth on the last diplomatic shuttle. She was met at the landing pad by President Dawson and a small group of officials. "You knew," Catherine said. It was not a question. Eliza nodded slowly. "I have known for 5 years that this day would come. The intelligence reports were clear. The assembly was never going to accept us. Our nature, our history, everything about us frightened them. Then why did you keep trying?" Eliza smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Because I wanted to give them every chance. I wanted to be absolutely certain that this was their choice, not ours. Now there can be no doubt. They chose fear over friendship. They chose to cast us out rather than accept us as equals." She looked up at the night sky, where the lights of the Exodus fleet were already visible. Thousands of ships gathering for the greatest journey humanity had ever undertaken. Now they will learn what happens when you give humanity no choice but to survive. Assembly monitored the early stages of the Exodus with growing unease. They had expected chaos, desperation, the slow collapse of a doomed species. Instead, they watched humanity move with a precision and purpose that made their military observers deeply uncomfortable. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. But by the time they realized the truth, it would be far too late. Admiral Samuel Ortiz had served in the human fleet for 42 years. He had fought pirates in the outer colonies, negotiated with hostile alien species, and commanded vessels through situations that should have killed him a dozen times over. Nothing in his experience had prepared him for what he now faced. 14 billion people. That was the number that appeared on his display every morning when he woke up in his quarters on Luna. Base 14 billion human beings who needed to be transported across the galaxy and into the unknown darkness beyond. 14 billion lives depending on his ability to coordinate the largest movement of people in the history of any species. He stood in the central command room of Luna Base, surrounded by holographic displays showing the position of every vessel in the Exodus fleet. 3,000 ships. It was not enough. It would never be enough, but it was what they had. Samuel Ortiz was not a man who wasted time wishing for things he could not have. His communications officer, Lieutenant Patricia Vega, approached with a datapad in her hands. She was young, barely 30 years old, but she had a calm efficiency that Samuel valued highly. "Sir, we have received another demand from the Assembly. They want to inspect our departure vessels. They say they need to ensure we are not violating the terms of the Exile." Samuel did not look up from his displays. "Denied, sir. They are threatening consequences if we refuse." Now Samuel did look up. His eyes were hard. "What consequences?" "They've already exiled us." They've already cut us off from everything we've built over 40 years of membership in their precious assembly. What more can they do? Patricia had no answer to that. Tell them our ships are our business. The Exile terms state that we must leave galactic space. They say nothing about how we choose to do it. The Assembly's observation posts along the border watched with growing confusion as the human exodus unfolded. They had expected to see refugee ships fleeing in disarray, desperate vessels overloaded with people trying to escape before the quarantine barriers went up. Instead, they saw military precision, formation flying, coordinated movements that spoke of months, perhaps years, of careful planning on the colony world of New Horizon. Dr. Caroline Webb supervised the evacuation of the planetary research facility. Cishia was a xenobiologist, 60 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and a mind that had never stopped being curious about the universe. For 20 years, she had studied alien ecosystems, working alongside scientists from dozens of different species. Now she was packing up her life's work to carry it into Exile. Her assistant, Lucas Perry, helped her load the last of the genetic archives onto a transport shuttle. He was 25, eager and idealistic, exactly the kind of young person who made Caroline hopeful for humanity's future. "They are really doing it," Lucas said, watching as another colony ship rose into the purple sky of New Horizon. "Every single person, every single thing we own, all of it going to the edge of nowhere?" Caroline secured the final container and stood beside him. "Not nowhere, Lucas. Somewhere we have never been before. That is a very different thing. But we do not know what is out there. The probes only covered a tiny fraction of the outer reach. There could be anything waiting for us. Hostile species, deadly environments, things we cannot even imagine." Caroline smiled. "Yes, is that not exciting?" Lucas looked at her like she had lost her mind. Caroline laughed and patted his shoulder. "Fear is natural, Lucas. It keeps us alive. But so does curiosity. So does the desire to see what lies beyond the next hill, the next ocean, the next star. That is what makes us human. We do not just survive. We explore." Back on Earth, the evacuation took on an almost sacred quality. Teams of archivists worked around the clock to document ancient cultural sites. Genetic samples from every plant and animal species were collected and stored in specially designed preservation vaults. Libraries were copied, museums emptied, monuments photographed from every angle. Everything that made humanity what it was. Everything they had created and discovered and dreamed over thousands of years of civilization was being prepared for the journey. President Katherine Dawson visited the construction site of New Dawn, the largest colony ship ever built by any species. It hung in orbit above Earth like a small moon, its hull gleaming in the sunlight. Katherine took a shuttle up to inspect the final stages of construction, accompanied by Chief Engineer Paul Martinez. Paul was a big man with rough hands and a voice that sounded like gravel. He had overseen the construction of New Dawn from the first bolt to the last, working 20-hour days for 8 months straight. The exhaustion showed in his face, but so did the pride. "She is ready," he said, as they walked through the massive corridors of the ship. "Capacity for 2 million people. Self-sustaining food production. Medical facilities that can handle anything. This ship could fly for 100 years without resupply if it had to." Katherine ran her hand along the smooth metal of a bulkhead. "We built this in 8 months. Yes, ma'am." The Assembly's engineering guilds said it would take 10 years. They said it might not be possible at all. Paul allowed himself a small smile. "Nobody told our people that." They reached the main observation deck, a vast room with windows that looked out over the curve of Earth below. Katherine stood there for a long moment, looking down at the planet that had been humanity's home for all of its history. "What is it that drives us, Paul? What makes us capable of things like this?" Paul thought about it. "Fear, maybe. When you know you are going to lose everything, you find strength you did not know you had." "Fear is part of it," Katherine agreed, "but I think there is something else too." "What?" Catherine's smile was cold. "Spite." The final day of the Exodus arrived on a cold morning in December. Every human being who wanted to leave had been loaded onto ships, Some had chosen to stay behind, a few thousand scattered across the galaxy who had made lives among other species and did not want to abandon them. They were given that choice. No one was forced to go. Admiral Ortiz stood on the bridge of New Dawn as the last ships took their positions. The Exodus fleet stretched across millions of miles of space, 3,000 vessels carrying the entire human population and everything they owned. It was the largest gathering of ships in the history of any known species, Patricia. Vega approached with the final status report. All ships report ready, Admiral. The assembly observation posts have increased their monitoring. They are watching everything we do. Samuel nodded slowly. Good. I want them to see this.
Activated the fleet-wide communication channel.
His voice reached every ship, every person, every corner of the human exodus. This is Admiral Ortiz. In a few moments, we will begin the greatest journey our species has ever undertaken. We are leaving behind the only home we have ever known. We are traveling into darkness that no one has ever explored. We do not know what we will find out there. We do not know what challenges await us. He paused, looking out at the stars. But I know this. We are human. We have faced extinction before. We have faced wars, plagues, disasters that should have destroyed us. Every time we have survived. Every time we have come back stronger. This will be no different. The Assembly's observation post recorded the departure in stunned silence. The human fleet moved out in perfect formation. 3,000 ships flying as one, their engines leaving trails of light across the darkness of space. There was no chaos, no panic, no desperate scrambling. Just order, purpose, an unsettling confidence that made the observers deeply afraid. The last human ship crossed the border into the outer reach at exactly midnight, Earth time. The quarantine barriers activated behind them, sealing off that region of space forever. The assembly relaxed. The human problem was solved. They could forget about the violent, unpredictable species that had troubled them for so long. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. The first year in the outer reach was the hardest thing humanity had ever endured. The colony ships pushed through uncharted space, navigating by stars that no intelligent being had ever named. Every jump into hyperspace was a gamble. Every new system could contain dangers that the unmanned probes had missed. Admiral Samuel Ortiz held daily briefings in the command center of New Dawn. The faces around the table grew more tired with each passing month. Lieutenant Commander Victor Reyes, the fleet's tactical officer, presented reports that never seemed to contain good news. We lost the colony ship Morning Star yesterday, Victor said, his voice flat with exhaustion. Engine failure during a hyperspace jump. 800,000 people, gone in an instant. Wow. The room was silent. 800,000. It was a number too large to comprehend, too terrible to process. And it was just one of many losses they had suffered since leaving known space. What about the supply situation? Samuel asked. Holding steady, but just barely. We found a mineral-rich asteroid field in the system we passed through last week. Mining operations are underway, but it will take months to process enough material to replace what we have lost. Samuel nodded slowly. He looked older than he had a year ago. The weight of 14 billion lives pressed down on him constantly, never allowing him a moment of peace and morale. Victor hesitated. Difficult to measure, sir? People are scared. We are further from known space than any species has ever traveled. Some of the civilian ships have reported ... problems. What kind of problems? Depression, anxiety. Some people have simply given up hope. They believe we are all going to die out here. Samuel understood. He had felt that despair himself. In the dark hours of the night when sleep would not come and the stars outside his window seemed cold and hostile. But he also knew that giving in to despair would doom them all. We need to find something, he said. Something to give people hope. Something to show them that this journey has a purpose beyond just survival. The answer came 3 months later. Dr. Caroline Webb led the science team that made the discovery. They had landed on a barren moon orbiting a brown dwarf star, investigating unusual energy readings that their sensors had detected. The moon's surface was covered in ancient ruins, structures made from materials that human science could not identify. "This is impossible," Lucas Perry whispered as they walked through corridors that had been empty for millions of years. The assembly's records go back 50,000 years. There is no mention of any civilization in this region of space. Caroline ran her hand along a wall covered in symbols that glowed faintly at her touch. The assembly only knows what exists within their borders. Out here in the darkness, they feared to explore. Anything could exist. They found the database at the heart of the ruins. It was a crystal structure the size of a small building, pulsing with energy that their instruments could barely measure. When Caroline approached it, the crystal responded to her presence. Holographic images filled the air around her, showing scenes from a civilization that had flourished when the oldest assembly species were still learning to make fire. They called themselves the Architects, Caroline explained to the Leadership Council. Aboard New Dawn, our translation is still incomplete, but what we have learned is extraordinary. She activated a holographic display, showing images from the database. Cities that stretched across entire planets. Ships that traveled between galaxies as easily as humans once traveled between countries. Technology that made the assembly's most advanced systems look like children's toys. They achieved a level of advancement that we can barely comprehend, Caroline continued. And then, roughly 10 million years ago, they vanished. President Katherine Dawson leaned forward. Vanished? A civilization that powerful does not simply disappear. They did not disappear exactly, Caroline said. They ascended. They evolved beyond physical form, beyond the need for bodies, or technology, or material existence. But before they left, they prepared for those who might come after them. She brought up a map showing dozens of locations scattered across the outer reach. They left caches of their technology throughout this region, waiting for someone capable of finding them. Waiting for someone willing to venture into the darkness. Implications hit everyone in the room at the same time. The assembly had exiled humanity to what they believed was a wasteland. Instead, they had sent them to the one place in the universe where they could become something greater than anyone had ever imagined. The first cache was located on a world they named Sanctuary. It was beautiful in a way that no human word could capture. Crystal formations the size of mountains rose from seas of liquid metal. The sky was 3 different colors at once, and the air smelled like nothing any human had ever breathed before. Lucas Perry was part of the team that entered the facility hidden beneath Sanctuary's surface. The doors opened at their approach, as if the building had been waiting for visitors. Inside, they found rooms filled with technology that seemed like magic. This device can synthesize any material from base elements, one of the scientists reported, his voice trembling with excitement. Food, medicine, construction materials, anything. This one appears to be a medical system, another called out. The diagnostic readouts suggest it can repair any damage to biological tissue. Any damage at all? Lucas stood before a wall covered in holographic star charts. The maps showed not just the outer reach, but the entire galaxy, including regions that the assembly had never explored. And at the edge of each map, there were more locations marked. More caches. More technology waiting to be discovered. They knew, he said softly. They knew someone would come eventually, and they prepared everything for us. The news spread through the Exodus fleet within hours. For the first time since the journey began, people felt something other than fear and despair. They felt hope. They felt excitement. They felt the ancient human drive to explore, to discover, to become something greater than they had been before. Admiral Ortiz ordered the fleet to establish permanent settlement around Sanctuary. Construction began immediately, using a combination of human engineering and architect technology. The results exceeded anything they had dared to imagine. Cities rose from the alien soil in weeks instead of years. Factories produced materials that the assembly had never seen. Medical facilities eliminated diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries. The starving. Desperate refugees who had fled into the darkness were transforming into something new. 2 years after the Exodus, President Katherine Dawson addressed the human population from the central plaza of First Light, the first city built on Sanctuary. Behind her, crystal spires caught the light of the alien sun, creating rainbows that danced across the gathered crowd. When the assembly cast us out, they believed they were condemning us to death, she said, her voice carrying across the plaza and across every human settlement in the outer reach. They were wrong. They did not end our story. They began a new chapter. She looked out at the faces before her. Some she recognized, people who had worked beside her during the desperate months of preparation for the Exodus. Others were strangers, people she had never met, but who were all part of the same human family. Out here in the darkness, they feared, we have found gifts beyond imagining. We have found the legacy of a civilization greater than anything the assembly has ever known. And we have found something else, something even more valuable. She paused, letting the moment stretch. We have found ourselves. We have found what humanity can become when we stop asking for permission and start taking our destiny into our own hands. The assembly wanted us to disappear. Instead, we will become something they cannot ignore. The crowd's response shook the foundations of the city. Cheering, crying, hugging each other, 14 billion people celebrating a second chance that none of them had expected. In the darkness beyond the galaxy's edge, humanity had found its future. And that future was brighter than anything they had left behind. 30 years passed like a dream in the Galactic Assembly. The exile of humanity became a footnote in history books. Teachers told young students about the dangerous species that had once threatened galactic civilization, and how the wise leaders of the assembly had removed that threat permanently. The quarantine barrier remained in place, maintained by automated systems that no one bothered to check anymore. Everyone assumed the humans were dead, victims of their own violent nature, destroyed by the emptiness they had been sent to inhabit. Chancellor Vortek had died of old age 15 years after the exile. His successor, Chancellor Mirasol, was even more convinced of the assembly's superiority than her predecessor had been. Under her leadership, the assembly grew complacent, confident that their position at the center of galactic civilization was secure forever. They did not notice when trade ships began disappearing along the outer rim. The losses were small at first, 1 or 2 vessels a year, easily explained away as accidents or equipment failures. When patrol ships were sent to investigate, they found nothing. No debris, no distress signals, no evidence of what had happened. The assembly blamed pirates, natural phenomena, mechanical problems. They blamed everything, except the truth they could not bring themselves to accept. Admiral Samuel Ortiz had died peacefully in his sleep 10 years after the settlement of Sanctuary. He was buried with full military honors. His grave marked by a monument that overlooked the city of First Light. The words carved into the stone were simple. He brought us home. His successor was Admiral Victoria Reyes, daughter of Victor Reyes, who had served as Samuel's tactical officer during the Exodus. Victoria had inherited her father's sharp mind and her grandmother's patience. She commanded a navy that bore no resemblance to the desperate fleet that had fled into exile 3 decades earlier. The new ships were magnificent, built using architect technology and human innovation. They were faster, stronger, and more powerful than anything the assembly possessed. Their weapons could tear through enemy shields like paper. Their engines could cross the galaxy in days instead of months. And there were thousands of them. Victoria stood on the bridge of retribution, the flagship of the human expeditionary fleet. The ship was massive, 3 times the size of the largest assembly warship, with a crew of 50,000 and enough firepower to level a planet. Around her, officers worked at stations displaying information from across human-controlled space. "Report," she ordered. Commander Marcus Cole stepped forward. He was the grandson of Nathan Cole, who had heard the exile verdict so many years ago. The family tradition of military service had continued through 3 generations. "All reconnaissance elements have returned safely," Marcus said. "We have completed mapping of the Assembly's border defenses. Their quarantine barrier is completely outdated, Admiral. We could breach it in 17 locations simultaneously without losing a single ship." Victoria nodded slowly. "And the internal situation within the Assembly?" "Deteriorating steadily. The Crix Empire has been challenging Assembly authority for years. The Malari Confederation is threatening to withdraw from the Union. There are at least 6 active rebellions in the outer territories, and the Assembly's military is stretched thin trying to contain them all. Victoria allowed herself a small smile. They are weaker than they have ever been. If we were to strike now, they would not be able to mount an effective defense. The temptation was powerful. Victoria could feel it pulling at her, the desire to show the Assembly what their exiled species had become. She imagined human warships descending on Assembly worlds, their leaders forced to watch helplessly as everything they had built crumbled around them. Revenge, pure and simple. But Victoria was her grandmother's granddaughter. She knew that revenge, however satisfying, rarely served long-term interests. "Continue observation," she ordered. "We move when I decide it is time, not before. I want to know everything about their military capabilities, their political situation, their economic vulnerabilities. When we make our move, it will be decisive." On Sanctuary. The society that had emerged from the exile was almost unrecognizable from the one that had left. Earth. Architect technology had transformed every aspect of human existence. Disease was a memory. Lifespans stretched across centuries. The physical limitations that had defined human life for millions of years simply ceased to exist. But the changes went deeper than technology. The exile had united humanity in ways that peace and prosperity never could. The old divisions that had plagued the species throughout its history, the conflicts of nation and race and religion, had faded into irrelevance. There was only one identity that mattered now. They were the survivors. The people who had been cast into darkness and emerged stronger than ever. President Andrew Grant, nephew of the famous Ambassador Eliza Grant, led the human government from the Capitol building in first light. He was a thoughtful man, more interested in long-term planning than immediate action. When Admiral Reyes brought him reports of the Assembly's weakness, he listened carefully but did not rush to judgment. "We could destroy them," Victoria said during one of their meetings. "Our technology is centuries ahead of theirs. Our population has grown to 40 billion. Our military could sweep through Assembly space in a matter of months. And then what?" Andrew asked quietly. "Then we would control the galaxy. Control is not the same as lead. Control requires force to maintain. It breeds resentment and rebellion. Is that what we want? To become the thing we once fled from?" Victoria had no answer. Dr. Caroline Webb, now 87 years old but still vital thanks to architect medical technology, continued to lead the study of the ancient civilization's legacy. Her latest discovery had the potential to change everything. She presented her findings too. President Grant and Admiral Reyes in a secure facility deep beneath the surface of Sanctuary. The device she showed them was beautiful, a crystalline structure that pulsed with light and patterns that seemed almost alive. "We call it the Revelation Engine," Caroline explained. "It can broadcast information directly into any communication system in the galaxy, regardless of encryption or security measures. The architects used it to share knowledge across their entire civilization instantaneously." Andrew studied the device with growing understanding. "You were saying we could send a message to every world in the Assembly at the same time?" "Not just a message, Mr. President. Everything. Our entire history since the exile. Our technological development. The truth about what we have become out here in the darkness." Admiral Reyes understood immediately. "Information as a weapon. We show them what we are now and watch them tear themselves apart trying to figure out what to do about it." "Exactly," Caroline said. "When the Assembly learns that the species they exiled now possesses technology centuries ahead of their own, when they realize we have been watching their borders for decades and they never detected us, the political chaos will be unprecedented. Their alliance is already fragile. This could shatter it completely." President Grant was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "We have waited 30 years. We can wait a little longer, but begin preparations. When the time comes, I want every intelligent being in the galaxy to understand what humanity has accomplished. I want them to see what their fear and prejudice created." He looked at the Revelation Engine, its lights dancing in patterns that seemed to hold secrets beyond human comprehension. "They exiled us because they were afraid of what we might become. Let them see what we have become." and let them be truly afraid. The preparations took another 2 years. Ships were positioned, messages were composed, every detail was planned and rehearsed until it was perfect. Humanity had learned patience during its years in the darkness. They had learned that the greatest victories came not from brute force, but from careful strategy. The assembly continued its slow decline, oblivious to the storm that was gathering beyond its borders. They had forgotten about the species they had cast out. They had convinced themselves the human problem was solved forever. They were about to receive a reminder that humanity never forgot. And humanity never forgave. The 42nd anniversary of the Exile arrived with little notice in assembly space. It was an ordinary day on most worlds, filled with the usual business of trade and politics and daily life. No one remembered the significance of the date. No one thought about the species that had been cast out so many years ago. On Sanctuary, and the 43 worlds of the human sphere. It was celebrated as Remembrance Day. Ceremonies were held in every city, every settlement, every ship in the fleet. People gathered to honor those who had died during the Exodus and to remember the home they had left behind. It was also the day humanity chose to announce its return. The Revelation engine activated at precisely midnight, first light time. Across the entire galactic assembly, across 847 member worlds and countless space stations and ships, every communication device suddenly displayed the same image. Every screen, every holographic projector, every neural interface showed a human face speaking words that were automatically translated into every language in the galaxy. President Grant looked into the camera with calm, steady eyes. 42 years ago, the Galactic Assembly voted to exile humanity. You sent us into the darkness beyond your borders because you feared us. You believed we would die out there, alone and forgotten. You were certain that you had solved the human problem forever. He paused, letting the words sink in across 1,000 worlds. You were wrong. The broadcast continued for 3 hours. It showed everything humanity had built in the outer reach. Cities of crystal and steel that made the Assembly's greatest achievements look primitive. Warships that dwarfed anything in the galactic fleet. Technology that defied the laws of physics as the Assembly understood them. It showed the population statistics. 40 billion humans spread across 43 worlds. Healthy and prosperous and utterly unified in their purpose. It showed the architect technology that humanity had mastered, its capabilities that the Assembly could not hope to match for centuries, and it showed the fleet. 3,000 warships positioned just outside the quarantine barrier, close enough to reach any Assembly world within hours. The message was clear without being stated. Humanity could have invaded at any time. They had chosen not to. We do not come seeking revenge, Andrew said, as the broadcast neared its end. We come offering a choice. The Galactic Assembly can acknowledge its mistake and welcome humanity as equals. You can open your borders, normalize relations, and accept that the species you tried to destroy has become something greater than you ever imagined. His expression hardened slightly. Or you can cling to your fear and your prejudice. You can maintain your quarantine and pretend that we do not exist. But know this, we will continue to grow, to explore, to advance. And one day, perhaps in a century, perhaps in 1,000 years, you will have to face the civilization we have built. The choice of whether that meeting is peaceful or not is yours to make. The broadcast ended. Silence fell across the galaxy. Then the chaos began. Chancellor Mirasol demanded an emergency session of the Assembly. But half the member species refused to attend. They were too busy dealing with the panic that had erupted on their own worlds. The revelation that humanity had not only survived, but thrived. That they possessed technology centuries ahead of anything the Assembly had developed. Shattered the careful lies that generations of leaders had told their people. The Cricks. Empire declared independence within 6 hours. Their announcement was simple. The Assembly had failed to protect them from a threat that had been growing for 4 decades. They would seek their own arrangements with the human sphere. The Malari Confederation followed 2 days later, then the Valorian Republic, then a dozen smaller nations, each one rushing to establish contact with humanity before their neighbors could gain an advantage. Admiral Victoria Reyes watched the collapse from the Bridge of Retribution. Her fleet remained in position, making no aggressive moves, simply observing as the galactic order tore itself apart. "The quarantine barrier is effectively abandoned," Marcus Cole reported. "Assembly forces have been recalled to deal with internal security issues. We could cross at any time." Victoria shook her head. "We wait. Let them come to us." They did not have to wait long. The first diplomatic vessels arrived within a week, carrying representatives from former assembly worlds. They came with gifts, trade proposals, and desperate apologies for the exile their governments had supported so long ago. They came because they had no other choice. Dr. Caroline Webb advised on how to handle the flood of diplomatic contacts. At 18-9, she was the last surviving member of the original Exodus leadership, kept alive and vital by the technology she had spent her life studying. "We accept their overtures," she counseled. "We trade with them. We negotiate with them. We even protect them if necessary. But we never forget what they did, and we never become what they were." "What do you mean?" President Grant asked. "They exiled us because they feared us. Fear and exclusion, that was their answer to anything they did not understand. We must be better than that. We must prove that strength and compassion can exist together. Otherwise, what was the point of everything we suffered?" Andrew considered her words carefully. "You want us to forgive them?" "No," Caroline said firmly. "I want us to prove them wrong. They said we were too violent, too dangerous, too primitive to be part of galactic civilization. Let us show them that we can build something greater than their precious assembly ever was. Let us show them what humanity is truly capable of." The months that followed saw a complete reorganization of galactic power. The assembly did not dissolve formally, but it became irrelevant. Real power shifted to the new Galactic Cooperative, an organization founded on principles that humanity had learned during its years in exile: mutual respect, free trade, collective defense, and absolute rejection of exclusion based on fear. Within a year, more than 300 species had applied for membership. They came because the cooperative offered something the assembly never had: genuine partnership rather than hierarchical dominance. Victoria Reyes retired from active command, passing the fleet to a new generation of officers who had never known Earth. She spent her final years writing the official history of the human exile in return, a document that became required reading on 1,000 worlds. On the centennial anniversary of the exile, a ceremony was held at the exact coordinates where the Exodus fleet had first entered the outer reach. Representatives from every species in known space gathered to witness the moment. President Sarah Martinez, great-granddaughter of Paul Martinez, who had built the New Dawn, addressed the assembled dignitaries. She was young, barely 40 years old, born on sanctuary to parents who had grown up among the stars. 100 years ago, humanity was cast out by those who feared us. We were sent into darkness, expected to die, forgotten by the galaxy we had tried to call home. She looked out at the crowd. Some of the faces belonged to species that had voted for the exile. Their descendants now stood alongside humans as equals. We did not die. We did not fade away. Instead, we built something new. We found ancient wisdom in the darkness and made it our own. We transformed ourselves from refugees into pioneers, from exiles into founders of a new civilization. She paused, letting the moment stretch. But our greatest achievement was not technological. It was moral. When we finally returned, we had every reason to seek revenge. We had the power to destroy those who had wronged us. Instead, we chose to build. We chose to include rather than exclude. We chose to prove that fear does not have to be answered with fear. The audience listened in absolute silence. The universe is vast beyond comprehension. There is room for all of us. Room to grow, to explore, to become something greater than we are today. That is the true lesson of humanity's exile. When you are pushed into darkness, you have a choice. You can give in to despair and hatred, or you can become a light that illuminates the way for others. She smiled, and in that smile was the accumulated hope of 100 years. We chose to become a light. And now, that light shines for everyone. The applause began slowly and built into something thunderous. Species that had once voted to destroy humanity now celebrated alongside them. The galaxy that had cast them out now looked to them for leadership. The darkness that was meant to be. Humanity's grave had become their forge. The exile that was intended to end their story had instead begun their greatest chapter. And the fear that had driven the Assembly's decision had been transformed into respect, admiration, and something approaching awe. The Galactic Assembly had voted to exile Earth. Humanity had not waited to be told twice, and in the end, it was the galaxy itself that was transformed by their return. Somewhere, in the vast reaches of space, the spirits of those who had died during the Exodus looked down on what their sacrifice had built. 14 billion people had fled into the unknown. 100 years later, their descendants numbered in the hundreds of billions, spread across a civilization that spanned half the galaxy. They had survived. They had adapted. They had overcome. They were human, and they would never be exiled again.